time was shortened because part of it was ceded to the distinguished delegate from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The next speaker is the Minister of Housing and Village Development of Malaysia, His Excellency Mr. Michael Chen, to whom I now give the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I'm happy to have been given the opportunity to address this august gathering today. In doing so, I wish to express the greetings and good wishes of the Government of Malaysia to the UN Habitat Secretariat and the Government of Canada for making this conference a present reality. My delegation and I look forward to a meaningful participation in the deliberation and also hope to contribute in any way we can to make this conference a success. To my mind, this conference is not merely symbolical of man's optimism and determination to face future complexities boldly. Rather, this conference strives for solutions to deal with such complexities concertedly. Uppermost in our minds today, the concern we all have on the fitness of our human settlements as to the appropriate place on earth for our people to live with dignity and free from fear of eradication and extinction. We are here because we want to harness our national and international resources and escalate the efforts to deal with the problems confronting human settlements. Mr. President, human settlements the world over are centers of hopes and expectations to the present and future generations of mankind. No doubt, many amongst them are successful creations where human beings are reaping the fruits of their own labor and toil, all of the ingenuity of their forefathers. Nevertheless, we know there are human settlements which are not fortunate to become successful creations of man. In these places, human survival, rather than human settlements, remains the priority objectives of national efforts. As in many other cases involving human survival, the human settlement problems also relate to the inequitable distribution of economic opportunities and basic human needs. For many years, the world, or at least the majority of the world communities, have stood helpless over the wastage of useful resources and facilities often sought by mankind as a whole. On a number of occasions, considerations for national economic factors have led to the destruction of food and grain in one country in the wake of hunger elsewhere. Empty housing units by the hundreds exist from time to time over long periods in one city, while squatters and squalor exist in some other cities. Words have been spoken many a time against such situations, and in the context of human settlements, it may well that I repeat them, for such words do convey different meanings to different people at different times. Any act at wastage of our vital resources is an act to accelerate the crisis process. Human settlements are vital to the survival of mankind, survival in the midst of power politics, population increases, pollution, and regret to conserve resources vital for growth. Human settlements should be regarded as sacred places where historical, cultural, and religious features are maintained and preserved as heritage for future generations. Any attempt at reducing the significance of these places and features should not be tolerated. The dignity and centrality of man in the environment are our prime concern. Where his basic right is threatened or denied or discriminated against by any human act, error, or omission, his cause is that of ours. The fulfillment or restoration of his basic right shall be our common struggle. Mankind as a whole, and not just the privileged few, aspires to live in an environment conducive to a wholesome life. Achieving this fitness of the environment is no easy task, especially to developing nations. In the wake of the world economic disorder, some developing nations have discovered their endeavors are like chasing the horizon. However serious the attempt to get nearer to it, it remains that far. Mr. President, this conference is not intended to trigger an alarm which could lead to panic solutions, and I do not expect it to be so. Its first objective is to create awareness on the issue of human settlements. This appears to have been achieved. However, it is still confined to governments and the upper strata of our respective societies. It becomes imperative to our respective nations to make this awareness permit to all strata of our societies so that it forms an integral part of our day-to-day operations and lifestyle. At the various committee sessions, the techniques and possible solutions to the major issues are being discussed. No doubt the feasibility of utilizing the techniques already known to mankind would be examined, although I am inclined to agree that such available techniques can be mastered to solve the complexities confronted by many human settlements. Yet some of them, no matter how efficiently applied, will only enable us to scratch the surface of the problems. As a result, success can only be but limited or temporary. Many developing nations, including Malaysia, have national problems which are considered unique in themselves. Some of the human settlement problems are only a small part of the bigger national issues, and their respective experiences cannot, unfortunately, be shared by others, but confined to these nations themselves. In such cases, it is logical that their problems be dealt with in their own manner. Hence, many amongst them have adopted a policy of amity with others and non-interference in their own internal affairs. Such aspirations must be appreciated and respected. The aptness of approaching the human settlement problems on a comprehensive scale, especially on problems connected with congestion in cities, pollution, and the exhaustiveness of vital resources to mankind, is an ideal which many of our nations have been striving for. Such an eco-development approach can be in various forms. It may involve remote sensing for development purposes or early warning systems for preservation and protection or any other devices. Such devices can be expensive, especially to developing nations, and if adopted on the basis of a mere transfer of technology, can become countervailing to national efforts. But it is not a question of cost alone that matters. We are concerned with devices which can help man to obtain the most suitable balance in the exploitation of resources in development efforts, and at the same time able to avoid side effects detrimental to the environment. National resources are not limitless. National priorities in development programs of developing nations sometimes cannot and do not cover the entire levels and spectrum, but mainly confined to the very basic of human needs. For some developing nations, success in providing the people with such basic needs can be earned only through major national efforts and heavy investments. The developing nations, however, need access to acquire the knowledge and skill most effective to deal with the complex problems of human settlements. Such an access must be given to them without difficulty if we expect them to fulfill their vital roles in the global scheme of ensuring the fitness of human settlements to mankind. My delegation looks forward to the type of approaches which can provide us with the skills to contain human settlement problems within manageable proportions, if not to entirely overcome them. For my country, Malaysia is a young nation, young not only because of its independence, but also in her demographic makeup. About 60% of Malaysia's population is under 30 years of age. She still has abundant natural and untapped resources. For example, about 60% of Malaysia's land area is still jungle land. As you will observe in the film about to be shown, one of Malaysia's approaches in human settlements is through land development by making use of her forest resources. We in Malaysia have also applied the Felda approach to human settlements in the suburbs of cities, especially in the workout-trained mining areas. The approach is comprehensive and includes the provision of basic economic opportunities, housing especially for the low-income group, community facilities, and efficient communication systems. In the near future, many more of such satellite towns will emerge around Kuala Lumpur, the capital, and other cities to provide for an orderly modernization of the Malaysian multiracial society under a new economic policy. Similarly, in the rural areas of Malaysia, new growth centers are being developed under the regional development approach. Apart from the development of planned settlements with economic activities of commercial and industrial based, this approach also provides for the dispersal of industries to rural areas and at the same time enable the traditional agricultural sector to be transformed on a gradual basis into modern agricultural sector or urban or industrial sector. The major thrust of this gradual transformation exercise is provided by the established Felda land settlements I have described earlier. Currently, Malaysia has implemented 6 areas, 2 for lowland crops and 4 for multiple industries. Under such regional development approach, several more are being planned. My government welcomes any party who is interested to know more of such regional development approach, and we will be happy to respond to any investor who is prepared to participate in the selected activities in these regional centers on joint venture basis. As you may probably be aware, Malaysia human settlement problems generally are not so complex. Despite this situation, however, we have instituted various measures, including the conservation of natural resources, accelerate food production, population dispersal, and family planning, equitable income distribution, housing, communication, and other development programs. Nonetheless, we will not allow ourselves to be complacent, but will remain alive and vigilant to the issue confronting human settlements. Mr. President, this conference has indeed enabled us to obtain deeper insights into the various issues affecting human settlements. My country will endeavor to contribute more significantly to the efforts of mankind in making this world and its human settlements more secure and promising to future generations. Capsule, please.
Al señor ministro de Vivienda y Desarrollo de Malasia que no va a tener.
I'm sorry, but we could not have, there's not enough time.
Room to accommodate its growing population. A solution to the problem was found with the establishment in 1956 of FELDA, the Federal Land Development Authority. FELDA went about its task in earnest and began converting jungle and forest land in the lowlands and foothills into areas for the cultivation of oil palm, rubber, sugarcane, and cocoa, thus creating the basis for future settlements in hitherto inaccessible areas in the country's interior. FELDA's approach to land development and settlement is based on the concept of providing the would-be settler with a package deal. The land is tilled, crops are planted, and houses are built even before the settler comes on the scene. In the initial stages, individuals were reluctant to participate in the settlement projects. But gradually, with the tremendous success achieved in the schemes, doubts were dispelled and applications began pouring in large numbers. By 1975, FELDA had settled 32,109 hitherto landless families in its 167 schemes. Each scheme is generally more than 4,000 acres in size, with a central village for about 400 families. The crops, once harvested, are taken to the factories. after which Felder takes over the task of processing and marketing the produce. All Felder settlements enjoy a relatively high standard of infrastructure. While the schemes flourish, Felder is trying to find solutions to burning issues. One of these is the question of detachment. After having created an integrated agricultural operation, how does it ensure that it will remain integrated? This and other related questions remain to be answered. The important thing, nevertheless, is that Felder's attempt to transform jungle and forest land into progressive human settlements has met with great success, a success that has meant for thousands of Malaysians a brighter dawn.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, thank you for your indulgence. Thank you.
Agradezco al señor.
I would like to thank the Minister of Housing and Development for Malaysia. I would like to explain to delegates that it is necessary to stick to the timetable. Therefore, if you intend to show films or capsules, as soon as you see the green light, when the 12 minutes are up, that you put on your film immediately. Otherwise, we will not be able to show the capsules. Remember, there is a center where you must give the capsules, and they must have enough time. I now call upon the Parliamentary Secretary of the Ministry of Social Welfare of Ireland, the Honourable Frank McLaughlin.
Mr. President, I wish at the outset to express the sincere hope of the Irish delegation that this conference will, under your distinguished chairmanship, prove successful in relation to all of its major goals. And you are assured, sir, of the full support of this delegation in the vitally important work of these days in Vancouver. The facts which go to make up the scale and scope of the problem, which we have come here to tackle, are by now well known. At least they have been assembled, disseminated, and widely publicized. We know that the population of the world will double by the end of this century. We know that in the worst urban centers, life is often intolerable because of deprivation and squalor. We know that half the cities required to hold the increased population of the next 30 years have yet to be constructed. We know all of these things, but do we really understand them? It is only when we fully grasp what they mean in practical terms to men, women, and children that we can hope to do anything about them. The first task, therefore, is to ensure that the facts are more widely explained and analyzed. Education, in a general and continuing sense, must be seen as a basic ingredient in the program which will emerge from this conference. Workable structures will call for changes in attitudes and in policies, which can only be effected through this kind of understanding. Another fundamental issue arises from the recognition that the problem of the human settlement exists and are of increasing impact in both developed and developing nations. Governments everywhere are struggling with problems of a broadly similar nature in this area. They include the quantitative problem of the financial and other resources needed to provide, extend, and renew urban and rural settlements. And there are the mainly qualitative problems of design and planning, which must be overcome if settlement provision is to be suited to the needs of modern society, and if undesirable trends in new settlement patterns are to be countered. Of course, the particular difficulties in the developing world are related to their demographic, economic, and social trends, and it is essential, therefore, to ensure that settlement policy is properly aligned with economic and social policies at both world and national levels. What must be recognized in looking at the settlement problems of the developed countries is that the search for solutions there will be fundamental to the drive towards answers to wider world problems. In my view, Mr. Chairman, there is a direct relationship between a government's willingness to commit resources to solve its own settlement problems and its willingness to recognize and assist in one form or another in solving the problems of others to enrich their lives. Clearly, countries have many common needs in trying to deal with these problems. There is a general need for better knowledge and information, for research, and for the fruits of research over the whole range of political, administrative, and technical skills required in the development and implementation of settlement policies. It is in this area that one would expect to find the main emphasis on any new United Nations initiatives. The settlement structure in a country is a product of local geography and climate, shaped by history and tempered by the social and cultural values of a people. It is as distinctive as the heritage of which it is part, and the settlement provision of the future must have continuity with it. Mr. Chairman, we consider that the United Nations effort should seek firstly to support and encourage the national effort and should be in harmony with local circumstances. We in Ireland have practical experience of how effective United Nations assistance of this kind can be. A National Institute for Research into Planning and Construction, which was set up in 1964 with United Nations assistance, is providing a major input to urban and environmental planning work. And I would like, sir, to avail of this opportunity of expressing again our appreciation of the generous United Nations help provided at the setting up of that institute. More recently, we have welcomed the establishment in Ireland of the Foundation for Improvement of Living and Working Conditions, which has been set up by the European communities. It is to be expected that this institution, too, will have a distinctive contribution to international work in a number of areas coming within the scope of this conference. The past 20 years have seen major social and economic changes in our country. This is largely the result of industrialization and more recently of our accession to the European community. Our population is now rising substantially and consistently. Population increases will have to be accommodated largely in the towns. That means that land will be taken up for urban expansion at an unprecedented rate. The provision of the economic and social infrastructure necessary to meet present and future requirements in our towns will make great demands upon resources, particularly services such as housing, roads, and sanitary. Provision of services and infrastructure in the remoter parts poses special difficulties, not the least of which is the cost. It is important to encourage self-help and to opt for approaches which are suited to the local conditions. Few facilities contribute more to the possibilities for improving the standard of living in rural areas than the availability of a piped water supply. In Ireland, a major contribution has been made in this direction through a scheme by which groups of people are given financial and technical assistance toward providing themselves with a water supply from a local source where a public pipe supply is not available. Much reliance is placed on our physical planning system in accommodating population growth and movement. Land use and development planning is conducted by local planning authorities. Local development plans prepared in consultation with the local communities have made a major contribution to enabling the new habitat needs to be met in an orderly and effective way. A program of regional industrialization and promotion has been in operation for a number of years. The regional strategy is aimed at ensuring that future economic expansion is reasonably distributed throughout the country, that the difficulties of excessive urban concentration are avoided as far as possible, and that a system of strong and attractive centres is developed to assist in stabilising population. Housing, in whatever form, is undoubtedly the most prominent and important element in the consideration of human settlements. In our case, the basic aim of government housing policy is to ensure that, as far as the resources of the country allow, every family can obtain a dwelling of good standard in an acceptable environment on terms which they can afford. A large public housing programme, accounting for about 1/3 of total output, is designed to cater for those who cannot provide housing for themselves. A range of government and other public aids is available for persons and groups providing houses for themselves, and the proportion of people living in their own dwellings is high by international standards. In Ireland, we are taking part in a number of international activities aimed at wider and more effective international control of pollution. I have spoken about some of the policies and programs which we are developing in Ireland. And we are gathered together here to create the basis for new policies at world level. What is necessary during these 2 weeks of debate and exchange of experience is a commitment to reach practical conclusions and to face up to the implications of facts which are now beyond dispute. Recognition of the imbalances and pressures which now exist, especially in the developing countries, is essential. It is also important that emerging trends in the field of participation, community involvement, and acceptance of the role of the local neighbourhood should be given due weight and priority in policies and programs. In conclusion, Mr. President, may I express the hope that our deliberations will be marked by a common purpose to serve the people whose lives are affected by the settlement policies followed or allowed to develop in our various countries. Only if we fully accept the primacy of the human factor and of the individual and family concerns, which must be at the heart of the settlement policies, will we collectively arrive at decisions which will truly meet the needs of this and future generations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I should like to thank the Parliamentary Secretary of the Ministry of Social Welfare of Ireland. The next speaker is the Minister for Housing and Urbanism for Pakistan, Mr. Nasir Ali Bizbi. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. In spite of the repeated directives from the chair, I wish I could just not thank all. An opportunity of great importance because, in addition to the exchange of information, experiences, and ideas, it is the first time ever that the international community is taking up the issue of built environment on a global scale collectively. The success of the conference may mark a new era in promising a decent living environment to millions of human beings on this earth. A word of caution, however, must be sounded that unless this conference points out to practical and feasible solutions to the formidable problems of human settlements, these efforts may simply end as an expectation-raising exercise. Developing countries with population of 1 million or more, the figure is estimated at 60 at present, and 200 cities are projected to be in this population bracket by the end of the century. According to the figures released by the United Nations, Mr. President, some of the world's cities, which are already large, are likely to double in population in the next 10 years. Karachi in my country is listed among these. Fundamentally, of course, it's a function of population growth, but the disparity in the living conditions between the urban and rural areas has been instrumental to unprecedented growth of urban population, half of which is due to natural increase and remaining half as a result of migration from the countryside. Mr. President, there is no single factor which has destroyed the quality of life so completely and so adversely as the poverty of people. About 2/3 of humanity suffers from the pangs of acute poverty. About 700 million people today are locked into absolute poverty in the rural areas of the developing countries. The degree of deprivation is so extreme as to be a scar on human dignity for two basic reasons. Firstly, because a human being deserves much more than what has been provided, and secondly, because we have been unable to even meet his basic needs. I'm sorry to say so, but I feel that the future is even more bleak because most of the increase in the urban areas will be that of the poor people. Considering the present condition of the rural areas, their situation will be much worse. Pakistan, Mr. President, is familiar with the problems of human settlements since its independence in 1947, when over 9 million refugees migrated, and since then we have been faced with a number of natural calamities, and despite our meager resources, we have been able to resettle the dislocated population in a remarkable short period of time. The People's Government in Pakistan has made a firm commitment to the nation to provide a decent living environment to all citizens of the country. Poverty in my country denied a vast majority of the population basic essentials of life like shelter, food, and clothing. And that is the reason that for the first time in our country's history, a public commitment of providing food, shelter, and clothing was made by the People's Party chairman and our Prime Minister, Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Toward this end, a number of reforms have been introduced and programs undertaken. These range from programs for the rationalization of urbanization in the country, elimination of disparities between the urban and rural areas, to a wide range of programs for the provision of housing, institutional reorganization, and streamlining, improvement of slums, and the overall upgradation of living environments in cities, towns, and villages through a number of measures. Yet, we are still faced with a backlog of 2 million housing units in the urban areas alone. Problems of providing adequate services and facilities in the cities, towns, and villages, and resource constraints to undertake more dynamic programs for the improvement of living environment. We have certainly made a positive beginning, and our efforts will continue. The problems, Mr. President, certainly are of such magnitude that political and administrative delays can no longer be risked. We have to face the challenge and find necessary solutions to deal with it positively and effectively. Although much has been said to integrate economic and social planning with spatial and environmental planning, we must find practical ways of achieving it, because this would be the key factor in the improvement and upgradation of the living environment. Further, development planning exercise must recognize human settlements as a principal parameter in the development strategies, for they are a major resource as generators of wealth and well-being, and are undoubtedly a leading growth factor. Mr. President, it would emerge from this brief overview of the situation that the problems faced by human settlements are of such magnitude that call for full political commitment. Rectification of the situation would require enormous financial, human, and technological inputs. The responsibility for instituting positive action rests equally on the developing and the developed nations. The developing nations should aim at self-reliance and exchange of knowledge and experience among themselves, as this will go a long way in providing practical solutions to their problems. Large-scale sportive, financial, and technological assistance would be required from the developed nations. However, assistance from the developed countries should have elevation of human dignity and welfare as its principal objective. It should be free of political motives and should not aim at exploiting human misery. Mr. President, only if a commitment within our own hearts is made within and by all nations of the world to lift millions of human race out of pangs of poverty and indignity, we can avert the crisis which is already upon us. Thank you very much, sir. Capsule, please.
When independence came to Pakistan in 1947, so also did 9 million refugees. Virtually overnight, small towns built for small numbers of indigenous people became large cities for millions. These instant urban centers attracted the main development activity, but at the same time, severe disparities grew in housing patterns. The population multiplied at an average of 3% per annum, and industry concentrated in the cities. 75% of the people still live in villages dispersed over the whole countryside. We are attempting to reach the small farmer with a development concept that gives practical benefits. The Daudzai pilot project in the Northwest Frontier Province is now in the evaluative stage. In Daudzai, using a blend of cooperative and government-aided measures, it is clear that we have successfully formed the economic prerequisite for a dynamic rural settlement. The Agroville program, now under implementation in Balochistan, creates intermediary settlements to discourage rural-urban migration. At Mevan's first school, students pay no fees. Instead, the government pays each student to attend classes regularly. The program is being developed in harmony with the needs and opinions of the area's people. The Metroville designed by the Karachi Development Authority is the most outstanding concept in the search for urban solutions in Pakistan. It is an official habitat demonstration project. The central element is the utility wall. The 4 essential services of water, gas, drainage, and electricity are extended up to individual plot areas. People simply have to construct a room, and the unit becomes a fully functional house. Pakistan's capital, Islamabad, has gradually developed into the country's most well-planned city. It represents the first attempt on a major scale to create an egalitarian settlement in the country. To meet the challenge of the future, both on the urban and rural levels, Pakistan has already established a national institutional framework for human settlements.
Agradezco al señor ministro de la Vivienda.
I thank the Minister for Housing of Pakistan. The next speaker is the Deputy Secretary General, Coordinator of the United Nations Disaster Relief Organization.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chairman, I should like to speak to you briefly of the relationship between natural disasters and existing human settlements, of the impact of the former upon the latter, and of the way in which we can preserve human settlements in the future. Now, one factor is always present in the process of development, nature itself, of which man, with his will for progress and development, often neglects to take into account. I want to speak of the incidences, the impact of natural disasters on human settlements, to which the degree of importance which they deserve has rarely been given in present-day planning of national development. While human settlements are, as a matter of fact, considered as a key to development, we must preserve them from the economic and material devastation and the social disturbances caused by natural disasters. The natural disasters, Mr. Chairman, recently caused, in 1 year, the death of more than 111,000 people and affected 250 million other persons, in most cases in developing countries where these disasters are not rare. Moreover, it has been reckoned that between 1947 and 1970 inclusive, that more than 1 million persons have lost their lives because of natural disasters of all kinds. You will recall the Guatemala earthquake just a few months ago, the frequent cyclones in Asia, in particular the one which just afflicted the Philippines, the series of earthquakes which occurred recently in the Central Asian part of the Soviet Union, and just the day before yesterday in China, the very destructive earthquake which occurred in Turkey last year, and similar devastations which occurred in Italy less than a month ago. It is now recognized that the actual potential consequences of disasters are becoming so serious and assume such large proportions that much more attention must be given to the question of planning and prevention. From now on, we must consider the effects of natural phenomena, not only from the human angle or from their general social aspects, but likewise and above all in economic terms. We can never repeat enough that natural disasters are actually a substantial obstacle to economic and social development. The economic impact of natural disasters in developing countries, which are particularly exposed to them, represent by many times the total value of development aid which comes from bilateral and multilateral sources. Moreover, in percentage terms of the GNB, the damage caused by disasters in developing countries can very largely wipe out any true economic growth. In Guatemala, the population is reckoned at about 6 million people, and the per capita income is about $300 a year. The total cost of the rebuilding work as a result of the recent earthquake has been reckoned at $900 million. In other words, that earthquake cost Guatemala, in rebuilding costs alone, about half of its annual GNP. This example, among many others, only gives an idea of the tremendous direct impact of natural disasters on the development process. But we must not forget either the indirect or unknown effects which could occur immediately or in the long term, such as forced unemployment, production loss, crops which are wiped out, food problems, especially among women and children, increased frequency of certain diseases after disasters, and long-term effect and a medium term on the production cycle. Actually, the measures of help and reconstruction after disasters are not enough, Mr. President, and are only a part of the responsibility of governments and of the international community. As the General Assembly of the United Nations stated, the prevention of disasters and prior planning must be part and parcel of the national development policies. My office has given a very high priority to pre-planning and the prevention of disasters and proposed the working out of an international strategy for the prevention of disasters based on 3 key ideas. First of all, as I already pointed out, natural disasters are an obstacle to development. Secondly, most of them can be avoided. Thirdly, the essential preventive measures are the least expensive. I have already spoken of the first. Allow me to say a few words about the second idea. Those disasters, most of them can be avoided. If we cannot say today when these phenomena will occur, but we do know very often rather precisely where they will occur. For example, in the floodplains, floor areas, fault areas, and in avalanche corridors. Even in such erratic phenomena such as hurricanes, cyclones, we know that 90 to 95% of human losses and material losses are due to water action and not wind. We must draw the conclusions which are necessary when you choose the site for a human activity. Quite often, most of the disasters can be avoided if we locate human settlements in those areas where the conditions are the most favorable, in other words, where the risk of disaster is the least great. I refer to a third idea, that some of the essential preventive measures are also the least expensive. Now, when you have to choose the least dangerous spot for a human settlement, a town or a village, it may be a matter of land legislation, physical planning, zone regulation, and make a vulnerability analysis. In any development project, you must include a vulnerability analysis, a risk analysis, in other words, an appraisal of any types of risk. You will agree, Mr. President, that I am not recommending any pipe dreams, utopia, or an attitude of resignation vis-à-vis natural disasters. I am proposing down-to-earth, practical, cheap measures, common sense ones, to help developing countries which are exposed to disasters, in particular to tackle the natural phenomena and to see to it that they do not have any disastrous effects. I should like to stress here that the preventive activities and the pre-planning of the UNDRO are of direct or indirect concern to 5 of the fields concerning human settlements for which national action is recommended to the conference. I am speaking of the policies and strategies of human settlements, of the planning of human settlements, of buildings, infrastructure, services, land, and finally, popular participation. Allow me, in this connection, to draw your attention to the document titled The Protection of Human Settlements Against Natural Disasters, which my office drew up for the conference and circulated in document number A/Conf 70B/7. I will not dwell upon the activities of my office, but simply I will confine myself to make some recommendations. First of all, we must take into account the possibilities of prevention in the Declaration of Principles before the conference, as well as in the relative document dealing with national measures. Then, since it is first and foremost up to governments to take measures and decisions in this field, it is they who must encourage inclusion in their national development policies measures of a general nature or special nature dealing with the preparation for catastrophes and their prevention. Moreover, increased technical advisory services in the field of preparation and prevention must be provided bilaterally or multilaterally to countries which are threatened by disasters to help them to improve their institutional machinery and likewise to apply the essential measures in this field. Governments should also develop an increased national awareness for the prevention of disasters and stimulate active interest in this field in cooperation with regional and local authorities. Lastly, in cooperation with the United Nations and other international institutions, they should strengthen cooperation and international coordination concerning research on natural phenomena and the adaptation of concrete measures to the prevention of disasters to conditions existing in developing countries where these disasters may occur. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Disaster Relief Coordinator of the United Nations. The next speaker is the Ambassador of Switzerland to Canada, His Excellency Mr. Francis Charles Pittet. I give you now the floor, please.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I would first of all like to associate the Swiss delegation with congratulations which have been extended to our President. I'd also like to say to the delegation of Canada how pleased my delegation is at being a guest of your country, a country with which Switzerland is united by so many links of friendship. In thanking the government and people of Canada for their hospitality, I would also like to pay tribute to our Secretary General, Mr. Peñalosa, and all those at all levels whose efforts have made it possible for our conference to take place in conditions so favorable for success. Mr. President, our meeting without any doubt constitutes an exceptional event. The problems of housing affect us all without exception, although in different degrees. It is a matter of the greatest importance for my country too, not so much for its own part, because we are aware of being very privileged in many respects, but particularly because we are keenly aware of the impact, sometimes even dramatic, in so many countries of the world. Switzerland realizes that the dimension, truly universal dimension of the challenge facing the modern city, facing the family of mankind in terms of cities. And from this point of view, too, we feel great sympathy with others. Switzerland would also like to make a useful contribution to the search for ways and means of meeting this challenge and contributing to this work. Thus, we are ready, in particular, to share the fruit of our experience, which we may have acquired in this field, and making the technical services which we have available for international cooperation. And we have listened with interest to the statements of delegations here in the desire the better to understand their problems and convinced that their experience can teach us some useful things. I will not go into details about the problems familiar to Switzerland in terms of urbanization and land use, nor as to the way in which we are trying to tackle these problems. Our national report will give to those who so wish an insight into this subject, which will not be, believe, exhaustive and objective. I shall confine myself to recalling that Switzerland is at the present time making considerable effort to bring about an appropriate distribution of its population and a rational use of the land. The objective which we seek, demographically speaking, is not only the preservation of the particular features of our landscape and our sites, we also want to preserve the land necessary for agriculture and to check the growth of agglomerations and to make urban centers less congested. The measures taken also are intended to maintain institutions and the federal structures of the country. The Swiss policy, in terms of territorial development, aims at respecting the different components of our nation, religious, economic, and social components, as well as our minorities. Furthermore, we want to encourage them and sustain them. I come now, sir, to the position of my delegation with regard to the various documents before the conference. The Swiss delegation can, overall, endorse the draft declaration of principles and the various proposals for recommendations with regard national measures. The text which will be adopted by the conference are addressed to us all. Our respective situations are, however, very diverse because of the diversity of our political, economic, and social circumstances. Switzerland is a small country, but we have in Switzerland a very broad range of different interests, a diversity which reflects the world itself. This diversity of situations, circumstances, juridical systems, and traditions imposes, in our view, on our common problem, differentiated solutions. My delegation is happy to note that the recommendations submitted for our approval are couched in sufficiently general terms that they do not require to be applied globally or uniformly. Rather, they make it possible for all countries and peoples to develop fully their particular special features. Switzerland, for its own part, will use this as a basis without, however, infringing on its federal structures. For its part, Switzerland advocates the adoption of sufficiently flexible measures free from prejudice or dogmatism. We intend to give a central position in our human settlements policy to the individual and family. We are determined to ensure, in planning and developing urban agglomerations, full respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It is in this spirit we shall continue, in particular, to strive to develop urban areas of low and medium density in order to eliminate the tendency, which is present in my country too, towards a very much stronger concentration of great agglomerations. We want to avoid vastness and the alienation of the individual which results from it. And this is one of our major preoccupations. Thus, the necessary participation of the population in questions which affect cities will be better assured. The strength of our traditions in this field, we believe, stems from the existence of units at the personal level, where every person can express himself when it comes to formulating policy and putting it into effect. We also believe that the most vulnerable segments of the population should be the subject of increased attention. My delegation regrets that children, old people, and invalids are not explicitly referred to in the texts before us. We particularly regret that the rights of children who have to live in the cities we are building today have not been included in the draft Declaration of Principles, along with rights of women, which quite rightly appear there. In order not to repeat the errors committed by the older generation, young people should also, we believe, be made right now better aware of the responsibilities which await them and prepared by appropriate instruction to assume these responsibilities when the time comes. The Swiss delegation hopes that the proposed amendment we have presented along these lines will win the consent of the conference. The Swiss delegation approves the programs which have been proposed for international cooperation. We hope in this regard that private initiative and the role of local authorities will enjoy a proper place along with governmental action. Mr. President, with regard to the institutional results of the conference, my delegation at this stage would like to state its preference for a solution which would have the effect of regrouping all the activities of the United Nations in the sphere of human settlements within the United Nations Programme for the Environment. The link, which was established 4 years ago by the Stockholm Declaration, between the natural aspects of the environment and their artificial aspects, are just as valid today, we believe. As the Governing Council of UNEP noted at its last session, planning, improvement, and management of human settlements requires at all levels a method whereby all aspects of the environment, natural and artificial, would be taken into account for all international cooperation aiming at the improvement of the living conditions of all peoples. Mr. President, the task to be performed is certainly gigantic. My delegation is convinced that it can be performed successfully if a balanced, effective, and reasonable plan of action is established with the firm determination and goodwill of all. Thank you, sir.
I thank the Ambassador of Swaziland for Canada. I now give the floor to the Federal Minister for Energy and Industry of Yugoslavia, His Excellency Mr. Desan Ilijevic.
Gospodine predsjedniče,
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, our conference is the first assembly after the Stockholm Conference to consider the priority field of human environment. In our view, this conference is characterized by two significant notions. The first is reflected in the fact that in the course of the last 4 years, mankind has enriched itself with the knowledge that overall human behavior must incorporate the component of environment, since it is an integral part of the whole socio-economic development and not merely a technical or ecological category. And the second, that the whole of the human environment, either natural or urban, with all phenomena arising in it, is interrelated. Consequently, human settlements, that vital part of human environment, represent a component of development and not an isolated process. Implementation of this stand is complex, strong, lasting long. It is encouraging, however, that the activities of the United Nations, and especially the UNEP and certain specialized agencies of the United Nations, show a prevailing conviction that further efforts should be made to continue along these lines the international cooperation in the field of environment and human settlements in a direction which will correspond with interests of mankind as a whole. We are deeply convinced that in the sphere of human environment, which is to say human settlements, the developing and developed countries should commonly seek ways and means to solve current problems. While doing so, they should take care of both special conditions of every country or region and of the need for solutions to be based upon the new equitable international relations. Our conference is held at a time of unfavorable economic relations in the world, which inevitably affect the consideration and solution of problems of human settlements. Problems of human environment are an integral part of global relations, and because of that, a consisting part of the building up of a new international economic order. Conclusions taken by the Fourth Conference of the Non-Aligned Countries concerning the necessity of establishing the new world economic order, as well as the conclusions of the 6th and 7th special sessions of the United Nations, play an increasingly important role in the efforts to establish new international economic relations. In this context, the solution of the developing countries' problems represents a priority just because they are the countries most seriously affected by the existing economic relations. In our view, this conference must give an essential contribution to the realization of fundamental principles upon which this new international economic order should be founded. Mr. President, our delegation is convinced that it is now the time to consider comprehensively the problems related to human settlements and agree on standpoints which are to represent the basis for taking steps to solve these problems, both in particular